I'm sure you've all seen Hollywood films where sometimes somebody can go in and manipulate someone's memory. They can just pluck in like a little cassette tape or DVD or MP3 and alter it because it's so easy. Memories are so retrievable. Unfortunately, the Hollywood imagination has very little to do with actual reality. How our brains work, how memory works, and what does that all mean in our formation of our identity? Well, that actually has nothing to do with the Hollywood vision that the screenwriters like to have. They are in fact good storytellers, though albeit they have to bend reality just a little bit or a lot to kind of get us there. And I say this because sometimes we get so excited that we kind of like to not think about necessarily how our brain works, how memories are formed, and why that's important. And in truth, it's exceedingly important when we contemplate what is the role of mysticism, or who we are, or what is our identity, and how does it all relate. Aldous Huxley famously said, "A totally unmystical world would be a world totally blind and insane." Well, in truth, the fact that we don't have much of a memory so much today, and I'll get into that in a hot second, explains a little bit why we see all kinds of people on news networks, on TikTok feeds, and in the internet talking and talking and talking. It appears as if things just spew out of their mouth with very little actually coming into their eyes and their ears. And according to Aldous Huxley, well, they would be a little bit more than, or nothing more than blind or insane. Because in truth, we can't just change the reality of everything around us. We need to be attuned. The other challenge which comes up is that, well, we love to think that all of those thoughts that fly into our brain at any given time have significant meaning. It turns out they don't necessarily mean much of anything. And if you think about it really hard, 90% of your thoughts that you thought today are the same thoughts that you had yesterday and the day before and the day before that. Well, it turns out we do our thoughts. If you think about it that way, they're become automatic. So if you're automatically negative, you're going to do negative things and so forth, which is why and how memory can kind of help deal with that problem. I want us to think about something. About a millennia ago or more, being able to recite a passage from memory was considered a skill. You had to do it anyway. I don't know about you, but I had to memorize a couple Shakespearean monologues when I was in high school, along with a Robert Frost poem. Now, also when I was a kid, I still had to memorize just a few phone numbers and friends' birthdays. Today, how many of you know anybody's phone number? I open up my iPhone, I click call dad, and it calls my father right away. We have offloaded that ability to remember things onto external devices. The advantage, of course, is that in our hands with our phone, we have this amazing capacity to search out large volumes of information that don't necessarily need to take up valuable space inside of our noggin. The trouble is, what happens if you lose your iPhone or flush it down a toilet or something crazy happens? But even more than that, what neuroscientists are learning is that our memory is intertwined with our identity. It is the product of our experiences. And if we perceive and shape the world and describe and put together a narrative of our past experiences as negative, then we're going to have negative. In a way, when we think about the problem of amnesia, it's horrifying, because it robs us of our autobiography, and we are thus no longer grounded in anything. And to externalize our memory, by the way, the outsourcing of our memory means that we've put it up in the cloud. All of which, again, seems fine on one level, but it can also be not great on another. It can make us feel as if we ourselves are untethered, that our identity is still in formation, and who we are we are still discovering again and again and again, because we keep making the same mistakes and not remembering them, and therefore not learning from them. To drive this point home, there was a debate in Pirkei Avot among the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And in this debate, there was a story about one rabbi in particular, Rabbi Elazar, who had a photographic memory, and he is described as his memory being so powerful that anything that was written and shared with him, he would in fact retain it. And yet, there was debate. Was his memory considered better, or was it the preferred quality of Rabbi Elazar ben Akkar, who was not only able to remember things, but he was able to create new meaning out of the things that he had learned? And I'm sure you can all imagine that the rabbis decided that the one who's able to create new meaning is the one who had the most powerful and important point of all. We can, of course, spend all of our time pretending as if all of our experiences get held up into our phone, into our head, and then we continue to create a negative narrative and just sit with it, rather than letting it function more as a sieve and having things flow through that we want to let go of, things that we need to learn from, we learn from, and things that we really want to retain, we remember. Today, too, I will remind us that the fact that we struggle with our memory does in fact make us blind to certain mistakes that we tend to repeat. It's not the first time that we've had challenges in our country among different groups of people with different ideals. It's not the first time that people have debated economic policy or anything else. The question is, do we remember our past, and are we willing to learn from them? In the book Moonwalking with Einstein, Jonathan Foer did research about how people trained their brains before the information age. And prior to even the printing press, when books were few, he uncovered this fascinating way that memory was constructed. Memory palaces were this intense way of reading and remembering verbatim. You would build palaces in your brain and fill them up with all sorts of information. And if you think about it and look through the Rashi commentary, how he's able to build a castle upon the meaning of a single word, how he was able to maintain his memory of the Torah and the Talmud to be able to do that, he obviously was using memory palaces. Most likely so was Maimonides, who memorized the entire Talmud. That's how he was able to write Mishnah Torah, a feat, by the way, many of us today would find utterly impossible. We live in a world instead with so much readable material that we focus not on the quality of the books, not on even our quality of our experience of them, but the quantity that we actually go forth and read. We skim, we don't read in depth anymore. We want to get the Cliff's Notes. We don't break our teeth in trying to understand the ups and downs in Moby Dick. And I want to point out that the rabbis and the authors of the Bible struggled too. They realized how powerful memory can be in who we are and how we function as a person. They wanted us not just to remember, but they, I believe, even thought of the how we remember. In this morning, we recall that we were taught to remember the long way that Adonai has made for all of us, to remember God into our hearts. We're also taught in different parts to remember the long, arduous journey in the wilderness of 40 years. How could we remember that? And I think, again, memory palaces as the function of how offers the solution. Each and every place on the journey, you can almost imagine as a room in that memory palace. And if you were to meditate on your memory palace, it may even stop some of those nagging, annoying thoughts that keep coming up into our brain and distracting us and bothering us. I think furthermore, does ritual reinforce that ability to go back and remember? Why do I think that? Well, it turns out there's, again, a neuroscientific way for how we remember. We encode our memory. There's actually 3 phases. The first is encoding, the second is storage, and the third is retrieval. In encoding, we are making memory by strengthening its impression in our brain, by having a conversation, by writing it, by repeating it. We are starting in of ourselves, maybe even without realizing it, to create a memory palace. The second is through storage. We're not, again, like I said, this is not like you can go and retrieve a file and it's going to be there. Rather, our brain stores pieces and parts of each and every experience. It's enhanced further by sleep, hence the power of getting a good night's sleep. And of course, our memory can be unfortunately diminished by large quantities of alcohol, weed, drugs, and surprise of surprises, the thing that we all think we're really good at, but in truth, neuroscience tells us that we're not: multitasking. And lastly, retrieval. It is our mind who needs to go back and access it. But just like I said earlier, our memories are put in files in incomplete ways. To retrieve it, we have to go back and get all of those parts. And the interesting thing, and this is where and how memory is malleable, it doesn't come across in a complete file. It comes across in snapshots. And so we connect the story. This is why if I were to give a picture, and David, I think he's lying down now in the back, of him doing something as a kid that he never did, I can trick his brain into showing him a picture that happened 3 or 4 years ago, and his brain will imprint the picture. It will eventually put it into storage, and lastly, when I bother him about it, when he loves to be bothered, he'll pull it up and his brain will think it actually happened when it really didn't. By the way, don't use that trick on anybody. So what does this really teach us? Well, it teaches us that our memory is not linear. We love to imagine that our autobiography is a linear experience. It's not. We're going to have different things that pull and push us. We want to believe that our narrative that we formed in our life is also linear. And again, that's not exactly true. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Jeremiah. This wonderful book in the Bible. It contains the entirety of his story and the fall in the first temple period. It's not linear. And how it's organized, great debate. But the thing that's fascinating is its organizational structure fits very well with how our mind works in putting things together based almost on snapshots and impressions and organizing it that way. Reality, of course, is messier. Things aren't linear, and now since I've been talking about individual memory, I want to spend a hot minute talking about communal memory. Communal memory, and if I were to ask most people in this room where you were at on September 11th, most of you would probably have an answer. I know, David, you don't have one yet. But the interesting thing is that, do you remember all of the details of September 11th? And the answer is, you may think you do. In truth, you don't. That incident is what neuroscientists will call a flashbulb memory, or a circumstance in which one first learns of a surprising and consequential or emotionally arousing event, almost like a flashlight going off into our brain. And over time, neuroscientists have learned that the memories, the details of that experience diminish between the first and the third year of that event happening. After that, it pretty much gets locked in there. What's fascinating too is, remember I talked to you about the spaces in between how it's stored? There's an opportunity for correction. Now what does that mean? That means that as we all watch media outlets, engage in conversations, watch a TikTok or two about it, we will correct our own memory based on external narratives that are pulling together the pieces of our own little snapshots of experiences. So how is it that impacts everybody? As Jews, we all have these snapshots of how we celebrate the holidays. If I were to ask you, talk to me about Sukkot, maybe you'll talk to me about past sisterhood covered-ish dinners, or lighting of the menorah out in the courtyard. Or you maybe even will show me pictures and tell me stories of people whose names are on the walls in the sanctuary. What's also fascinating is that's the collective narrative and memory of Temple Beth Israel. And that collective narrative and memory is altered a little bit by all of our individual experiences, and then it's reinforced back into conversation. The same thing in our religion. That's why we have ritual. That's why we do what we do. It's almost as if it's constructed to fit how our brain and body works. And I'll highlight that the mitzvah of remembering it's an imperative. Not only are we told that we have to remember, we're told 169 times that we need to remember. That's not an insignificant amount. That tells us that it's important. It helps us form who we are. The great Hasidic rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, there is a quote of him at the entrance of Yad Vashem, Israel's museum of the Holocaust experience. Redemption lies in remembering. As Jews, our memories have saved us. As Jews, it has been the memory of our collection of exile and persecution, as well as the highs and lows, all of which we have transmitted to one another. Our memories obviously help shape who we are, for good and for bad. I know if you're anything like me, there are times when there are certain memories you just wish you could let go of and not ruminate on ever again. But I'll highlight one thing that came across my TikTok feed recently, and then I went back and learned more about it. With this story, I'll close. And it's one of Stephen Colbert. I don't know if you ever watched the Colbert Show. I did not realize that when he was 10 years old, he lost his father and his brother in an airplane accident. And he said, "I love the things that I wish most had not happened, and that what punishments of God are not gifts," in an interview with Anderson Cooper in 2019. He went on to say, "Life is a gift to exist, and with existence comes suffering. There's no escaping that. Of course, I didn't want it to have happened. I want it not to have happened. But if you are grateful for living life, then you have to be grateful for all of it. You can't pick and choose what you're grateful for. So what do you get from the loss? You get awareness of other people's loss, which allows you to connect with that other person, which allows you to love more deeply and to understand what it's like to be human, if it's true that all humans suffer. We gain from our memories are good and for bad. And in case you're curious about the 90% of your thoughts, which really don't necessarily matter, those you can probably learn to let go. You can probably learn about creating memory palaces so that you ask yourself, is that a memory or a thought that's even amounting to anything? And if the answer is no, say bye. On the other hand, sometimes those thoughts remind us and reinforce who we are and who we aspire to be. May we be comfortable in our thoughts so that they can push us to become a better person. May we be comfortable with all of our holistic experiences that have formed us to be who we are today so that we can continue to be our highest and best selves.